Gender equality is not just the right thing to do, but it is the smart thing to do for the health and success of our organizations, be they for-profit, not-for-profit. And it is the smart and right thing to do, not just for our organizations, but for our nations, and indeed for the whole world.
Seeing is believing. You need to see the change in order to believe in the change.
To have women at the top of the management of the country organization is absolutely critical to ensure effectiveness and success.
My dream for my daughter would be that her work would be equally paid, equally perceived, like the work her husband does.
We have now data that shows that companies that are inclusive are actually more profitable.
This is the beginning of a research agenda which is very deep and very rich and will help support the cause of closing the gender gap because it provides such powerful evidence for the value of doing so.
I think people would be tremendously surprised to understand what the gender gap is. In fact, a group of MBA students were asked just the other day, how many women do they think are in the Fortune 500 CEO level positions? And it's 3% is the answer. And they said 20 to 25%. Even students who are about to embark on their journey in business, they don't know what the spread is. Part of the problem with the gap not being closed is people believe that it's near closed or closed.
Women are almost as healthy and almost as educated as men, if not more in some countries, and yet you're not seeing that same participation in terms of the economy. So that really has to be the next big push, and we know that some countries that have done that well have made enormous gains in terms of their productivity.
You know, crisis is a terrible thing to waste. So for society to care more about these issues, there's never a better time than now. We've come through a horrendous global recession. The world is recovering at different rates. But wherever you exist in the world, you need and you know that this world has to operate differently going forward.
So we have now the very paradoxical and inefficient condition that we have a cadre of young women who are very well educated, but then are not using that education in the workforce. Societies are really missing on, the returns, the positive returns to educations of females because they have not been able to advance in the workplace.
Any country or any company that leaves half of its population behind, untapped, is a mistake. So the crisis really represents an opportunity, and what I've seen in business is people willing to challenge their traditional ways of thinking, think about new ways to create innovation, and women are an incredible untapped resource.
What we do here at the Women in Public Policy program is we focus on closing gaps. We identify and teach and train on what are the key interventions that work, whether it's in business, whether it's in law, whether it's in politics, or whether it's in civil society. It's not that people don't want to close gaps. It's that people don't always know how to close the gaps and think that it's a problem too big to solve.
The entry into the workforce, there's actually, in certain organizations, probably 80% of the organizations that we work with and we study, there are more women entering the workforce than men. But when you look at the different levels of management, it gets slimmer and slimmer.
People make up almost any organization. They are ultimately responsible for any organization's performance. So to the degree to which you can remove those barriers, be they explicit or implicit, that prevent women from realizing their potential within your organization will perform better.
It is imperative that we have a full slate of individuals, regardless of nationality, gender, various characteristics to pull from in order to address the challenges that face our business and organizations as a whole.
It's diversity of human experience and competency that will cause a team to outperform a homogeneous team every time.
So let's suppose the business is forecasting. The business trying to predict what's going to happen in this market, or what product should we introduce, or how are people going to respond to this new product. In those situations, what you can show, in a very formal way, is that if people from different backgrounds or people with different life experiences frame the world differently, if they have different categories, they have different causal models in their head, then they're going to make different predictions. And what you can show is those different predictions are going to combine in such a way that they're better than the individual predictions. You can sort of formally lay this out. So this isn't some sort of feel-good mantra. It's literally just a mathematical fact.
Most of our customers are women. So we are doctors in India, in the hospitals in Delhi or in China. We have an increasing number of customers who are women. So it's very, very important that we connect effectively with our customers.
We surveyed our partners at Deloitte several years ago and asked them, have you sold to a woman in the last 2 years? Was the women the decision maker for buying our services? 91% of them said that they had. Women are clearly part of our marketplace and they're part of our talent pool. Any organization should do that kind of analysis to understand their own business case for investing in women.
Another argument is about the choices that women and men make. In 1993, India amended its constitution with the following provision, that a third of the village heads had to be female. Because one of women's main chores in rural India in particular is getting water, so an important public good that they invested more in was clean and safe water.
When you look at the United States and what it would mean to close gender gaps here, in 1776, the United States was founded. In 1789, Congress as we know it in its shape today was begun. Women didn't achieve the right to vote till 1920. Between 1920 and today, we've never had a stronger representation than we do now. It's only 17%. 17% for the physical majority.
The evidence shows that empowered women in poor families have healthier children. That's the only way that you can break this link in the intergenerational transmission of poverty. Mothers in poor households, if they have meager earnings, mothers prefer to invest those meager earnings on child nutrition. A healthier child becomes obviously a healthier adult and a more productive adult.
Looking at fertility preferences, women tend to prefer fewer children than men. The preferences they have happen to be more aligned with what's good for society.
When you educate a girl, you actually increase the health of a family, you decrease the fertility rates, the number of children that young girl will ultimately have.
Eliminating the gender gap is not as easy as is sometimes claimed. So there's this, I think, idea that microcredit, for example, is going to kind of start a whole slew of women entrepreneurs, and that's going to close the gender gap. The striking statistics is that microcredit does increase the number of new businesses created, but it's not a massive increase. It goes from 5% to 7%. That's not bad, but it's not 50% of women are not suddenly starting new businesses, even if they are offered a loan. This is not something that women are sort of free to do just as they wish. This is something they do in negotiation with the entire other patriarchal structure that they are living inside.
Around the world, women start businesses at about twice the rate of men. They actually grow those businesses faster than men. The trouble is they tend to get stuck at a certain size of company. And the reason they get stuck is for all the reason women get stuck in corporations as well. Lack of access to networks, lack of access to role models, lack of visibility.
In most organizations, at least in the Western developed economies, you have men and women coming in through the door at the entry level in equal numbers. And then those numbers dwindle all the way through. They start petering out at mid-level, and they drop to very low percentages in the 10 to 15% at the senior management. When we start looking at CEOs of large global companies, those numbers dwindle down to 3%.
What happens is that because we are so in a numbers game around having gender equality, we think that if we can just get, critical mass of women into a system or an organization, that time will take care of it. And actually that hasn't happened.
I recently read a report that really sort of stunned me. The financial system in Italy, the banks, the commercial banks in Italy. And actually the commercial banks in Italy charge higher interest rates to women-owned firms than to male-owned firms.
There are also notions that people don't even know they have. For example, there's a conflict between being likable and being regarded as competent that a woman faces that a man might not. Consider a corporate setting. A man who demonstrates himself to be a strong leader that people can rely on, who perhaps has the proverbial sharp elbow, can be regarded both as competent and as likable by his peers. But a woman with those same qualities, or who has the potential to have those same qualities, faces an inherent conflict. She can either be respected or she can be liked. But if she does what it was required to be respected, people will say, geez, that's not exactly what I expect from a woman.
So what's the solution? One is first education, right? And really focus not on obviously educating girls, which is beginning to happen, but educating boys and men at senior to really be skilled and be viewed as an asset for employment.
The question then becomes how to organize business to take advantage of that pool, to allow women to have the opportunities to be recruited for positions in business, to be retained, to be promoted. Another very important aspect is development, because you can have, say, an MBA from a great institution, you can have a PhD from a great institution. When you get into the workplace, you will need further development and training and leadership opportunities, which really come from the organization itself.
So therefore we have to run these experiments and try and see, is it business training that might do the trick? Is it something about cultural norms that might keep these women back? Is it general education? Is it something about the household? Maybe we have to give these women negotiation training to become better bargainers in the household.
So some countries have gone down the route, for example, of quotas. So putting legislation in place that helps to get women into certain positions of political power.
Labor codes have been written mostly by men with the idea of a man job. They've also been written to prohibit temporary employment or part-time employment. Inadvertently, through those mechanisms, they have made it impossible for companies to offer women workers job forms that are more compatible with the kind of time they have during the day. So for many jobs, women, for example, are expected to be nurses, not doctors. They're expected to be daycare center workers, not policemen.
A thing of beauty is a joy forever.
There is enormous variation across countries. In some countries, for example, the more educated women are working more, but they're less likely to marry than less educated women, because now that they have more labor market opportunities, we haven't figured out how to make labor force participation compatible with marriage. Or we haven't really figured out how to make labor force participation compatible with motherhood.
The workplace will have to change. A lot of the systems and processes that were built and that we all live with today were built for a largely male worker in the industrial age. So it's not just that the talent today is changing and women are an increasing part of the talent pool, but it's also that the work itself has changed. So companies need to sort of figure out how those two things, which are sort of converging, how they're going to respond to those trends.
We often have people thinking, well, I'm in the government sector, or I'm in the private sector, the corporate sector, or I'm in the civil society sector. All of these sectors turn out they have similar dynamics, and that we could actually, number one, learn from each of the sectors, and number two, they all have to be working on this problem at the same time.
Let's take the case of like the gender gap in terms of upper management, right? That there's not many women who are CEOs. I think if you close that gap, you change the reality with which young women see the world, right? And you make it so that like they're going to say, I can do anything.
You get ripple effects. One, people will be dramatically more interested in full participation in political life. Two, you're going to have an industry which is going to be a higher economic earner because its product is more targeted to the marketplace.
I know it can happen. In my own company, I've created an ecosystem that has actually now resulted in 49% of our executive leadership is women.
It is also the only way for our society to make progress, to evolve, to innovate, and probably to exist.
When we created the Global Gender Gap Index back in 2006, it's been 5 years, and the idea was let's have an index that's really comparable over time. So we're actually able to track progress for countries, not just relative to each other, but relative to their own position when we first started. And now that we have this 5-year data set, we've done that analysis. And the good news is that by and large, the majority of countries are making progress.
When I talk to people, parents in rural India, one of the things that shows up as an aspiration for their daughter's job is they're going to be in politics, because there's a lot of reservation of jobs for women in politics. That's an answer I would not have expected or didn't hear 10 years ago. Now you hear it quite often.
So I was recently in Dubai speaking to a large conference of 600 men. I really saw a shift in the audience and really wanting to understand what this gender intelligence that we talk about really meant. So we need more men to put that out there and really make those declarations so we can shift the thinking in the world.
I feel like we have a good knowledge base, kind of understanding what's going on, and a good knowledge base of how to change. And that coupled with the media's increased attention and the stories out there on successful women and successful men who care about gender equality makes me optimistic.
We will have reached our goal when life isn't like a lottery, that some people get the winning ticket and some people don't, but everybody gets the winning ticket.